You ever notice how one promise can hang around a person like a cheap cologne? It slips into every room they enter, it coats the air, and everybody can smell it, even if they pretend they can't. That's how Marcus's whole life smelled. Promise. Not the glittery kind you make when everybody's got champagne, but the kind you swore on when your hands were shaking and the world felt too heavy to carry alone. My name is Devon. I grew up 2 doors down from Marcus, in a block where Sunday service, barbershop talk, and the sound of kids playing double dutch kept the world from shrinking. I knew Marcus the way you think you know a song, because you can sing the chorus, not knowing the verse, but I watched him close enough to learn the verses, the stuff he didn't sing aloud. Marcus and Keisha were schoolyard legends of the "we'll grow up and marry each other" kind. They were 15 and stupid, glorious and full of vows on Red Bull and park bench nights. Keisha's small eyes so steady they could hold yours like a promise gave him a cheap silver ring she'd bought with babysitting dollars. Marcus slipped it on, laughing like a king, and said he'd marry her before he was 30. Keisha nodded and tucked that promise into her ribcage like a seed. Then, life happened in the way life does now. Marcus's mom got sick. His part-time job at the mechanic became full-time because bills don't wait for graduations. There were nights Marcus would sleep on Keisha's couch because the heat had been turned off and bills had to be split 3 ways: payments, food, prayers. He promised again, in emergency room fluorescence, with the smell of antiseptic and coffee. The promise turned rawer, more necessary. Keisha made him a paper vow, like people make lists, no matter what, she wrote, folding the paper twice and tucking it into his wallet. And then, Marcus suffered. Not the romanticized suffering of a hero, the steady kind one that eats at the edges of you. Humiliation at interviews, knees scraping on concrete from overtime shifts, and the knowledge that every decision would either sink you or buy air. He carried a sense of scarcity, like a second skin. That scarcity makes people choose safety, or what looks like safety. Enter Tasha. She was the opposite of Keisha in the billboard way, polished, deliberate, her ambitions dressed like Sunday best. Tasha had a job that smelled like new leather and conference rooms, corporate communications, with a smile that opened doors. Marcus met her at a fundraiser. She laughed in a way that made people feel like accomplices, and she had her own car and her own apartment and no visible cracks. When she said, "We'll build," people around them leaned in like she was offering cake. Marcus fell for that. He started to believe marriage wasn't just about love or promises. It could be a ladder out of a trap. Tasha offered structure, introductions to people who could give him a shot at a stable job, a way to stop counting his life in rent checks. The very things Keisha and Marcus had vowed to survive together were the same things Marcus now thought could be fixed with a different partner. Here is the thing about promises. You can make them when you are certain, and you can make them when you are desperate. One sticks to your skin more stubbornly than the other. Marcus told himself he was being practical. He told Keisha gently once, or so he said. Keisha's version was different. She said Marcus stopped answering for weeks, that he missed her birthday, that he let the little paper vow fade in his wallet like a receipt. She watched him with someone else in a way that made the world smaller and meaner. We are living in a time when everything is loud and everything travels fast. Phones amplify heartbreak with screenshots, followings, and whispers. Word got loose 2 months before the wedding Tasha and Marcus were engaged. There were pictures, smiles, a ring that caught sunlight and clicked on timelines. Keisha's friends texted me. I watched it unfold in the quiet corners of the barbershop, where older men nodded like judges. Some said Marcus had upgraded. Some said he'd made a choice. Keisha, quiet as a church bell, swallowed it. Then there was the wedding itself. You have to picture the day. Late and hazy August. A church stuffed with fresh lilies and relatives who smelled like cologne. A reception hall that tried too hard to shine. Tasha wore a gown that could have been pinned from a magazine. Marcus looked like a man who had practiced joy in a mirror. The pastor beamed. There were videos on social media by the time the cake was cut. Celebration was in every corner, except for the back pew, where Keisha slid in wearing a dress the color of dusk and carrying nothing but an envelope. Keisha didn't crash the wedding in the way people think. She didn't scream or break the cake. She walked up the center aisle like she was walking into a courtroom. People whispered, then went quiet because her presence felt like a drumbeat. I sat 2 rows over and watched Marcus's face go the color of paper. You could see a whole history fold up in the lines around his eyes. Keisha stopped before the pastor. She put the envelope on the lectern. Then she did something I'd never seen from her. She spoke without tremor. "You promised me," she said. And those 3 words were a gunshot in a room built for celebrations. "You promised me your name, your future, your kid's first day of school. You promised me you would come back when your mum needed you. You promised me you would not sell our promises for a glossy resume." No one moved. The room held its breath, like it was waiting to see whether we were going to be 2 communities or one that split. She opened the envelope. Inside was the small silver ring he'd slipped on when they were kids, and the folded paper vow he'd kept in his wallet. She read out loud the words he'd written to her years ago, the ones he'd forgotten. The voice that had read the vows at weddings for 3 generations of our block faltered for the first time. Tasha's mother looked pained. Marcus's father closed his eyes like he was hearing thunder. Then Keisha looked at Marcus and said quietly, "You left me for something that looks like salvation, and forgot that salvation was me standing in your kitchen holding you when the light went out." There are different kinds of revenge. Some people think revenge is explosions. Some of us know it's quieter. A revelation that alters the value of a life you thought you could price. Keisha's intention that night was not to destroy. It was to name the truth and make the world listen. But words have consequences. Cameras caught everything because someone in the front row had the sense of a vulture and a phone. 3 hours after the reception, the clip of Keisha laying down the ring had 1 million views. People took sides. There were comments that were tender and comments that were cruel. Tasha, who had been as serene as glass, watched her life refract and crack. Marcus was left holding both the shiny new hope and the old promise in different hands, and neither felt real anymore. In the weeks that followed, 2 wrongs multiplied like interest. Tasha, hurt and humiliated, retreated first into anger. She called her mother, and they made choices that felt like defense. They moved apartments, took Marcus off social media, and told reporters that Marcus had deceived them. Tasha's mother, who'd wanted status and security for her daughter, helped orchestrate a demand for an explanation that was cruel in its formality. Marcus was cancelled not by law, but by a court of social verdicts. Friends picked sides, business prospects blinked, and offers Marcus thought would sustain him cooled. Keisha, for her part, did something more chilling to watch. She let the hurt become her architecture. She stopped taking babysitting gigs and went back to school full-time. She studied with an edge. She fixed her credit. For a while it seemed like a measured, slow revenge. If he wanted to choose what looked like safety, she would build her own. But the fury under her hands altered her, made her harder. She started showing up at places Marcus might be a mutual friend's gallery opening, a fundraiser, the coffee shop he frequented. Sometimes she would smile when they passed each other, like a blade being run along glass. Marcus, who thought a larger life would be a smoother one, learned that you can carry both an upgrade and a ruin. He tried to apologize, the sort of apology that felt like plasters on broken bone. Public, rehearsed, and too little. Keisha refused to take it because it felt cheaper than what he owed. Faithfulness. Marcus's grief curdled into blame. He blamed Keisha for not understanding how tired he was. He blamed Tasha for the way she had made him feel polished and wanted. He blamed himself for believing that a place could fix what a person promised. Hate bloomed. But hate, like a weed, doesn't grow alone. It entwines 2 people until both choke. Keisha's resolve hardened into a longer game. She began to date with purpose, not to punish Marcus with sorrow, but to test him. Marcus began to drink, to silence the memory of the ring on Keisha's fingers. Tasha, who had been everything Marcus thought he wanted, took control of the narrative with the precision of someone who had never been taught to forgive. She built a new image, one defined by dignity rather than humiliation. In a way, she exacted revenge by thriving. But thriving cuts both ways. It left Marcus watching someone he once thought of himself in, living the life he had wanted. Months folded into a year. The block remembered. Children who had played with Marcus and Keisha began to pick sides like teens in a playground. Both of them dated eventually. Both of them found careers. Both learned, slowly and with jagged edges, to live in the aftermath of the other. And yet, there was a kind of weather between them that never cleared. Here's what the wedding crash taught all of us, and this is the insight I want you to carry. Promises are not relics you can pawn when a better offer comes along. They're a ledger, and every time you trade them in for convenience or a flash of safety, you add a debt that certain hearts will collect. Marcus thought he could negotiate with the ledger, pay some interest now, buy respect later. But people keep the receipts that matter most: the nights they did not arrive, the phone calls they let go to voicemail, the promises folded into pockets and forgotten. Keisha's revenge changed her less than her resolve did. She found success, sure, but the scar left something colder in her chest. Marcus's new life gave him what he wanted in neat packages: a job title, an apartment, but not the one thing he kept trying to buy: peace with himself. They both discovered that hate is a tether. You can throw it like a stone and watch the ripples. You can pin it to someone else like a prize, but in the end, it hangs around you both. The last time I saw Marcus and Keisha together was at the funeral of Ms. Lorraine, a neighbor who had held us all like a bow. Marcus came with a suit like a man learning to carry himself. Keisha arrived later, quiet, with flowers. They did not speak. They sat on opposite sides of the pew. Afterwards, they both walked out of the church at the same time and passed each other like ships in a fog. For a second, just a breath, they looked and did not touch. Their faces bore the map of a story they had both authored. As they left, I wanted to shout for them to reconcile, to tell them that love could be different now, gentler. But that would have been my story, not theirs. So, here's the last honest thing. Love and hate in our time wear the same clothes, they're stitched from the same anxieties. The wedding crash doesn't end with a neat courtroom or a cinematic reconciliation. It ends the way most people's lives end, when they try to measure promises against a hunger for something else, messy, ongoing, and impossible to judge from the outside. Marcus is still learning that promises are not currency. Keisha is still learning that revenge never fills the rooms that loneliness opens. Tasha learned that dignity can be weaponized into peace, and even she carries a bruise. If there's a moral in the story, and I'm not here to sermonize, it's this: make your promises on days when the sun is steady, and keep them in the winters, too, when the world offers you easier paths. Remember whose hand you promise to hold, because we live in a time that will sell you the illusion of a better life, and it will be beautiful and glossy and temporary. But the quiet people who keep their vows will still be there when the lights go out. And if you break them, be ready to live with the sound of that breaking for the rest of your days. That's the thing about a wedding crash. It isn't always about the event. Sometimes it's the wake of every little choice that came before it. And sometimes that wake is the thing that defines a life. And so, as the drums fade and the fire dies low, remember this: in every tribe, in every time, the heart is the first battlefield. Promises are the arrows, love the shield, and betrayal, the wound that never heals. Until our next tale, keep your ears open and your heart guarded, for the next story may already be walking toward you. This is Folktales of Many Tribes. See you on another one. Peace.